what's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Recently, we put together this awesome $300 gaming PC on the channel, and in my first video with kind of the build, showing you what to buy, everything like that, we ran Windows on this machine. And given the low cost here, in fact, this whole build cost me $309 to put together. I picked up some used parts, some new parts here. It is an absolutely amazing performer when it comes to Windows gaming. But since I posted the initial video, I've had a lot of people asking about Steam Deck OS, and today that's exactly what we're going to be testing out on this $300 PC. And yeah, you can actually put one of these together. Like I mentioned, you will need to buy some used parts and some new parts. You can source them from eBay and Amazon. But I think it's totally worth it whether you want to run Windows or Linux on this machine. And of course, I would love to run stock SteamOS 3 on this, the same thing that comes on the Steam Deck, but unfortunately Valve hasn't released any other images except for the basic one for the Steam Deck itself, so we do need to kind of work with a different operating system. Holo ISO is the first one that comes to mind, but I've run into issues with it, hasn't been updated in a while. So what we're going to be testing out in this video is Chimera OS. It's got all of the bells and whistles that SteamOS 3 does. It uses OTA updates, so you don't have to worry about downloading a new operating system and installing it to the drive. And we've actually got some extras here that you do need to install manually with something like Holo ISO or SteamOS 3. We've got access to Proton GE right out of the box, so there is a lot that's gone into this operating system. I've done a couple videos of this running on mini PCs and larger gaming PCs. It's definitely one of my favorites right now, and if you're looking to game on Linux and just have all of those features that SteamOS 3 does, this is a really good option. Very easy to install. All of the information you need to know is over on the website, and it's continuously updated. If you want to learn more or you want to download it and install it on your system, I'll leave a link to the website in the description below. But before we get started here, I wanted to give you a rundown on the specs. Now for the case, we're using the Roswell FBM X2. It comes with a 400 watt power supply. This is around $42 to $43 on Newegg right now. Really great for a cheap build. For the CPU, I opted to use the Ryzen 5 5600G. You could go with the 5600 or the 5600X, but the 5600Gs used on eBay are really cheap right now, and that's exactly what I chose to use. We've got 16 gigabytes of DDR4 running at 3200 megahertz in dual channel, a used Gigabyte B450 motherboard, and of course for the GPU, because we want to get some real gaming out of the way on this, I opted for a Radeon RX590. You can pick these up for under $80. They've got 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and of course, it isn't the most powerful on the market, but for under 80 bucks, it really does work very well for a system like this. Alright, so I've got the operating system installed, went off without a hitch, actually really easy to do, like I mentioned. Everything's been working really well. Now with this PC here, we don't have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth built in. You could always add a dongle or an adapter if you wanted to. I'm using Ethernet. But everything else here is working. So I'm using an Xbox controller right now. Xbox button and A at the same time will bring up our quick settings. We can also head over to performance. From here, we've got everything that the Steam Deck has except for TDP control. We really don't need it here. This will just kind of max out here with that 5600G and that RX590. So real quick, let's head over to our settings. System. As you can see, we've got that 5600G. 16 gigabytes of DDR4, and this is running at 3200 megahertz. And we've got that RX 590 with 8 gigs of VRAM. Definitely not the most powerful card we could use, but given the price, I think it's offering some great performance. And since we're on that AMD platform, we've got really good compatibility here with this Arch variant of Linux. More of a Steam Deck OS-esque kind of operating system with Chimera OS. Now, one thing I always like to mention here is, when you first boot this up, if we try to start a game, it's going to go to 720p. That's just the way it's set up right now. What we need to do is go into each game. We're going to head to Settings, Properties, and from General, our game resolution. It's set the default out of the box, which will be 720p if you're using a 16:9 aspect ratio display. We can go up to 4K if you want. You could leave it at 4K and then adjust from there. But with a card like this, I go to 1080. That way we can go all the way up to 1080 with this game and anything below. But without that setting, it's just going to run at 720p. And obviously on this RX 590 at 720p, everything's going to run great, but we definitely want to up that resolution. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and see how this thing performs with some newer AAA games. And the first one here is going to be Spider-Man Miles Morales. With most of this stuff, I do need to let these shaders cache. But once that's finished, we can get right into some gameplay here. And here we have Spider-Man Miles Morales, 1080p, high settings, and we're getting an average of around 78 FPS. Of course, up high you will get more, but when you're down low, it does dip into the 70s. But it's a pretty great experience. I mean, I haven't had any issues with this game on the RX590, and it would be nice to jack this up to very high settings, and we could with a little bit of FSR, but I didn't want to use any of that. High still looks great, and it's playing just fine on this system. Moving over to The Witcher 3, 1080p high, and I thought it would do much better than this, but I am using kind of the updated version with DirectX 12. We do have FSR that we can enable with this also, but at 1080p high, we really don't need it. I got an average of 67 FPS. And that's really why I thought we'd do a bit better. I thought we'd be in the 80s, and with Windows, we do get about 15 to 18 more frames at the same settings, but it's fully playable. Street Fighter 6 does work pretty well with Proton, and by the way, with a lot of this stuff I did swap over to Proton GE. Remember, with Chimera OS we do have it built in, and of course if you used a different Linux operating system you could always install that, but it's set up ready to go, and with a lot of this newer stuff it seems to work out a little better. Street Fighter 6, 1080p, very high, we can play this at 60 all day. Doom Eternal, I knew we wouldn't have any issues with this one, 1080p, high, and we could probably go up to Ultra with this and still run it over 60. But with it set up like this, we got an average of 90 FPS, and I would love to have a little bit of a higher clock on this 5600G. Of course, we could go into the BIOS and overclock it if we want to, because it's not locked down. Another thing that would be kind of cool here is just have kind of an overclock menu built in for this GPU. Forza Horizon 5 is another one that I wanted to test. We're at 1080p high, and I've done a lot of testing with this, between Windows and Linux, and in Windows we do get a pretty significant jump in performance with this game. At high settings, we can get an average of around 98 FPS. With it set up in Linux here, we're getting an average of around 73. In fact, in Windows very high settings, we're actually getting better performance than we are here at high in Linux. Horizon Zero Dawn actually seems like it's struggling on this RX 590 at 1080p high. We're not using FSR, and usually I get some really amazing performance out of this game in Linux. But right now, I mean, we're right there on the edge of 60. We got an average of 65. So enabling a little bit of resolution scale, or maybe even dropping those settings down to medium, would definitely help out with this in Linux on the RX 590. And the final one here is Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p, medium, looking really good. We got an average of 78 FPS. I was kind of expecting, in the mid 70s with a setup like this at medium settings in Linux. Totally playable. I mean, I wouldn't mind playing this all day long. And again, with all of this stuff, resolution scale can definitely help out with these older 500 series cards. So overall, we actually got some really good performance given that this is only a $300 PC. And yeah, I mean, you can build this if you want to. I'll leave links to everything in the description. If you wanted to run Linux on it, you could get by with something like Chimera OS or set up your own kind of custom version of Arch. But you're not going to easily get all of those bells and whistles that we have here, like the performance overlay, all of those performance settings, system-wide FSR, and things like that. Just keep that in mind. And remember, with the latest versions of Chimera OS, we do have a desktop interface built in, so you could also use this as your everyday Linux PC. And we've got plenty of power here. 6 cores, 12 threads, that RX 590. Not a bad deal for $300. If you're interested in checking out the build and seeing what kind of performance this can put out with Windows gaming, I'll leave a link to that video in the description. And remember, all the parts will also be listed down below. You will need to pick up some used, you can pick up some new stuff, and you might be able to come out cheaper if you just wait it out or bid on a few things. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. I really appreciate you watching. If you've got any questions or if there's anything else you want to see running on this budget build, just let me know down below. And like always, thanks for watching.